Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different, um, something tailor-made for you guys in your UPSC journey, especially if you're focusing on international relations.
That's right. Plato's theories on justice, ideal societies, and the philosopher-king, they're practically required reading for anyone serious about understanding political theory, and that's really a cornerstone of international relations.
Absolutely. And to help us unpack all of this, we've got excerpts from some top Plato scholars focusing on his life, the famous academy he founded, and of course, the Republic, his masterpiece.
So if you're ready to level up your UPSC prep with some ancient Greek wisdom, you are definitely in the right place.
Okay, so let's start with Plato, the person,
Right.
right? I mean, we can't really understand his ideas without understanding the man himself.
Definitely not. Born into an aristocratic Athenian family, he could have easily coasted through life.
Oh yeah, lived a life of privilege.
Exactly. But then he met Socrates.
Ah, Socrates,
Yeah.
the gadfly of Athens, the ultimate questioner.
Exactly. And that meeting, it was a total turning point for Plato.
I bet.
He became a devoted student and witnessed Socrates' trial and execution. A man dedicated to truth and justice, condemned by the very society he challenged.
Wow, just imagine the impact of that experience.
It must have been utterly disillusioning to see someone like Socrates meet such an end.
I can't even imagine.
And it's precisely this disillusionment that fueled Plato's philosophical fire.
It's like the spark that ignited everything.
Yeah, he began to question the very foundations of Athenian democracy, searching for a more stable and just system.
And that search led him to the concept of philosopher-kings.
Exactly.
Okay, so this concept might sound a bit radical, especially to someone prepping for the UPSC in the 21st century.
Right.
Could you imagine pitching philosopher-kings to a panel of interviewers?
I mean, it would definitely be a conversation starter, but remember, the UPSC isn't just about regurgitating facts.
Right.
It's about showing them you can think critically.
Absolutely.
And Plato's philosopher-king concept is a prime example of that.
Okay, so explain that a little bit.
So he argued that ideal rulers wouldn't be politicians driven by ambition or popularity.
Makes sense.
Instead, they'd be individuals with a deep love for wisdom and a commitment to justice.
Philosopher-kings?
Exactly. Ruling for the common good guided by reason and virtue.
This is an idea that has sparked endless debate over the centuries.
Oh, absolutely.
Some view it as a utopian dream, while others see it as potentially a gateway to authoritarianism.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? And for a UPSC aspirant, understanding both sides of this argument is crucial.
So crucial.
It's about analyzing different perspectives, weighing the pros and cons, and forming your own well-reasoned conclusions.
It's not just about what you know, but how you think.
Exactly.
That's such a key point for the UPSC.
It really is.
Okay, so while the concept of philosopher-kings might seem a bit far-fetched in today's world, it's important to remember that Plato's ideas were born out of a very specific context.
Absolutely. Ancient Athens.
He'd seen firsthand the volatility of Athenian democracy, its susceptibility to manipulation.
Oh, yeah. And the dangers of mob rule.
So his search for a more stable and just system, however radical it might seem to us now, was a direct response to those challenges of his time.
And you know, that focus on context is exactly what makes studying Plato so relevant for the UPSC even today.
I totally agree.
It forces you to think critically about the interplay between ideas, historical circumstances, and political systems.
And that kind of analytical thinking is what sets you apart in the exam hall.
100%.
Speaking of Plato's impact, let's move on to his academy. This wasn't just any school. It was like the intellectual powerhouse of ancient Greece.
Absolutely. Think of it as like the ancient equivalent of Harvard or Oxford.
Wow.
It attracted some of the brightest minds of the time.
So they weren't just churning out philosophers.
No, not at all. It was a hub for the study of mathematics, astronomy, politics, you name it.
And I love the inscription above its entrance.
Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here.
Okay, hold on, geometry.
Yeah.
Why geometry specifically? It seems a bit out of place for a philosophy school.
It might seem surprising, but for Plato, mathematics, especially geometry, represented a pathway to understanding universal truths.
Oh, interesting.
He saw it as a way to train the mind to think logically, to think abstractly.
I see.
And these skills, he believed, were essential not only for philosophers, but for anyone seeking to understand the world and contribute to a just society.
So for Plato, knowledge wasn't just an abstract pursuit. It was deeply connected to action, to building a better world.
Precisely. And the academy, it was designed to be a training ground for future leaders who could use this knowledge for the good of the state.
Okay, so in a way, it's kind of like how you're using your time right now.
How so?
By delving into Plato's ideas, You're not just acquiring knowledge for the sake of knowledge. You're equipping yourself with the intellectual tool to analyze complex issues,
Right.
to understand different perspectives. Now, before we move on to the Republic, which is kind of the main event here, I want to touch on something that our sources highlighted: Plato's complicated legacy.
Complicated how?
While he's often hailed as this champion of justice and reason, some scholars, especially in the 20th century, have criticized him for being a bit too well authoritarian.
Yeah, that's a valid point and something we definitely need to address.
Okay, so lay it on me.
One of the main criticisms leveled at Plato is that his emphasis on social hierarchy and this philosopher-king concept could be seen as laying the groundwork for totalitarian regimes.
I could see that.
After all, who gets to decide who's wise enough to rule? And what happens when those in power abuse that authority?
It's a slippery slope, right?
It is, and that's where the real challenge of studying Plato comes in.
Okay, so what is it?
It's not about blindly accepting or rejecting his ideas, but about engaging with them critically.
I like that.
It's about recognizing the potential pitfalls of even the most well-intentioned systems and understanding how those pitfalls can be avoided.
And this is especially important for someone like you prepping for the UPSC.
Oh yeah, big time.
The ability to dissect an argument, to identify its strengths and weaknesses, and to present your own nuanced perspective. That's what sets a successful candidate apart.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So is Plato a proto-totalitarian, or is he a misunderstood champion of justice?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer.
I figure.
It's not about labeling Plato as good or bad. It's about understanding the complexity of his ideas and their potential interpretations.
Nuance is key,
Always.
especially in the UPSC.
Absolutely. And that's precisely what we'll be exploring as we dive deeper into the Republic in the next part of this deep dive.
So if you're ready to grapple with some of the most challenging and enduring questions about justice, power, and the ideal society, stay tuned. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a like if you're finding this deep dive helpful for your UPSC prep.
We'll be back in a flash with more Platonic wisdom.
Welcome back. Now it's time to tackle Plato's magnum opus, the Republic.
This is where Plato really lays out his vision for an ideal society. And it gets right to the heart of many political debates that still rage on today, even in international relations.
And for Plato, the ideal state is a reflection of the just individual.
Right.
So before he even gets into politics, he takes us on a journey into the human soul.
That's right.
Okay, hold on a second. The soul. Are we getting into metaphysics here? I thought we were talking about political philosophy.
Well, that's the beauty of Plato. He seamlessly blends those different realms together.
Okay, so how does he do that?
He argues that the soul has three parts, reason, spirit, and appetite.
3 parts.
Yep. Reason seeks truth and knowledge, spirit's all about courage and ambition, and then appetite drives those basic desires for things like food, pleasure, wealth.
So like different aspects of our personality.
Exactly. And for Plato, a just individual, and therefore a just society, is one where reason rules the roost, keeping those spirited ambitions and those unruly appetites in check.
So reason's kind of like the wise ruler of the soul.
You got it.
Okay, I'm following.
Yeah. Now think about how this applies to the global stage.
Okay.
What happens when a nation-state's foreign policy is driven by unrestrained ambition or a thirst for resources?
Things probably don't go so well.
Right. It could lead to conflict. It could destabilize the international order.
It's definitely something to consider. And
Yeah.
I mean, if we look at historical examples of aggression or resource-driven conflicts, there might be a connection there.
Exactly. And that's why understanding Plato's concept of a just individual, it's so relevant even in international relations.
Because it helps us understand the motivations of different actors on the world stage.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's connect this back to the philosopher-king.
Okay.
If reason equals wisdom, and Plato believes that only those ruled by reason should lead, then
You've got yourself a philosopher-king.
there it is.
Someone who embodies wisdom and justice, whose decisions are guided by reason, not by personal gain or the whims of the masses.
Okay, but isn't that a recipe for elitism? I mean, who gets to decide who's rational enough to be a philosopher-king?
Ah, and there's the rub. That's one of the major criticisms of Plato's Republic.
I can see why.
Critics argue that this system, it could easily slide into tyranny with a small, self-proclaimed enlightened group holding all the power.
Yeah, I know who wants that.
It raises some big questions about accountability and the potential for abuse.
For sure. And, our source material actually highlighted a really fascinating point about this.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
One scholar described Plato's view of humanity as at once incredibly low and incredibly high.
Incredibly low and incredibly high.
Yeah, low because he believed the masses needed to be guided by those with superior reason.
Okay, I get that part.
But high.
Yeah.
Because he saw the potential for philosopher-kings to lead humanity to a truly just and harmonious existence.
That's a brilliant observation. It really captures that tension that makes Plato so endlessly fascinating.
Right.
He presents us with this incredibly idealistic vision, this utopia ruled by wisdom and justice.
But then you can't help but wonder, is it achievable? And at what cost?
Exactly. And this tension, the struggle between the ideal and the real, it's something you'll encounter constantly in international relations.
Oh, for sure.
Think about the UN, for example.
Okay.
It's founded on these noble ideals of peace and cooperation, but then you have the reality of power politics.
Yeah, the reality on the ground.
Conflicting interests, and the challenge of actually enforcing those ideals in a very messy world.
It's never as straightforward as we'd like it to be.
And just like we're doing to be able to analyze those tensions, understand different perspectives, and formulate your own argument.
Because that's what the UPSC is all about. It's not enough to just know the facts you need to be able to think critically and apply those facts to real-world situations.
Precisely.
Okay, so we can't forget about the historical context here.
Oh, absolutely not. Context is everything.
Plato didn't write the Republic in a vacuum. He lived through a period of immense upheaval in Athens, including the Peloponnesian War and the rule of the 30 tyrants.
He saw firsthand the fragility of democracy, its vulnerability to demagoguery, and the dangers of mob rule.
So his ideas, even the seemingly radical ones, were a direct response to the challenges of his time.
It's like trying to understand the foreign policy of a particular country.
Right.
You can't just look at their actions in isolation.
You have to look at the bigger picture.
You have to consider their history, their geopolitical context, their internal political dynamics. It all plays a role.
And that's what makes studying political philosophy so valuable for the UPSC, especially for those focusing on international relations.
I'd agree.
It gives you that historical perspective, that deeper understanding of the forces that shape political systems and the recurring themes of power, justice, and the struggle for a better world.
It's about connecting the dots.
Yes. Okay, so I have to ask. Our source material mentions that some scholars view Plato's Republic as a blueprint for totalitarianism.
Right.
Isn't that a bit extreme?
It's definitely a provocative statement. And while Plato's ideas about social hierarchy and the absolute authority of the philosopher-kings do raise some red flags from a modern perspective, it's crucial to avoid simplistic labels.
Okay, so explain that a little more.
Totalitarianism as a distinct political ideology, it emerged centuries later with its own unique characteristics.
So it's more about recognizing the potential dangers of certain aspects of Plato's thought without completely dismissing his entire philosophy.
Exactly. Remember, nuance is key, especially in the UPSC.
Always.
You need to be able to see both sides of an argument, weigh the evidence, and form your own conclusions. And that's precisely what engaging with a thinker like Plato encourages us to do.
It's amazing how a text written thousands of years ago can still spark such debate and resonate with contemporary issues.
That's the power of ideas. Plato's work continues to challenge us, to push us to think critically about the fundamental questions of power, justice, and how we organize ourselves as societies.
And those are questions that are just as relevant in the world of international relations as they are in our own personal lives.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to emphasize something crucial for you as a UPSC aspirant.
Okay.
Studying Plato isn't just about memorizing a bunch of theories. It's about developing that critical lens.
That ability to analyze.
Exactly, that ability to analyze complex arguments and see the connections between seemingly disparate ideas.
And it's about recognizing the historical context.
Yes, the specific challenges that shaped Plato's thinking and how those challenges continue to echo in the world of international relations today.
Whether you're analyzing the motivations of a nation-state, dissecting a complex treaty, or grappling with the ethical dilemmas of international intervention, Plato's ideas provide a framework for understanding the enduring questions of power, justice, and the human condition.
So even if you don't agree with everything Plato says, and let's face it, who does, engaging with his work is an invaluable exercise for anyone aspiring to navigate the complexities of international relations.
I couldn't agree more.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground of the Republic. But Plato's journey wasn't over. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore his later works, Statesmen and Laws, where he grapples with the practical challenges of ruling and offers a more nuanced perspective on the role of law and governance. Stay with us. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've journeyed through Plato's life, explored the intellectual hub of his academy, and we delved into the profound and sometimes controversial ideas of the Republic.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey so far.
But Plato's philosophical journey, it didn't end there in his later works, Statesmen and Laws. He kind of shifts gears a bit.
Oh, yeah. In what way?
Well, he grapples more with the practical realities of governance and offers a more nuanced perspective on the role of law.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So in Statesman, Plato moves beyond this idealized philosopher-king concept, and he introduces the idea of the true statesman.
The true statesman. Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
And this isn't just someone who possesses wisdom and virtue. It's someone who understands the art of governing someone, who can adapt their leadership style to different circumstances and make tough decisions based on practical considerations.
So it's less about this perfect ideal and more about someone who can actually get things done in the real world.
Exactly.
This sounds a lot like the kind of leadership we see in international relations today,
How so?
where leaders have to navigate those complex alliances, balance competing interests, and respond to unpredictable global events.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's all about being adaptable and making those tough calls.
Right. And just as a school diplomat needs to understand the cultural nuances and the political dynamics of different countries, Plato's true statesman needs to be able to read the situation, analyze the potential consequences of different actions, and make judgments based on what's best for the community as a whole.
It's about taking that holistic view.
Exactly. Now, this shift towards pragmatism, I find it really fascinating, especially considering Plato's earlier emphasis on the philosopher-king's absolute authority.
Right, it does seem like a bit of a departure.
So does this mean he's abandoning the idea of philosopher-kings altogether?
Not necessarily, but in Statesman, Plato acknowledges that even the wisest ruler benefits from a well-structured legal framework.
Okay, so the law still plays a role.
Absolutely. He introduces this idea that laws can provide a level of stability and predictability, safeguarding against arbitrary rule and ensuring that power is exercised justly.
So it's kind of like a system of checks and balances even on the philosopher-king.
You could say that Plato seems to recognize that even the most well-intentioned individuals can be swayed by personal biases or they can make mistakes.
It's human nature.
Right. And laws in this context act as a safeguard, ensuring that the ruler remains accountable to the principles of justice and the common good.
And this has really clear implications for international relations.
Well, for sure.
Think about the role of international law and institutions in regulating state behavior and promoting cooperation.
Right. Even powerful nations are expected to operate within a framework of agreed-upon rules and norms.
Exactly. And it's so fascinating to see how these ideas were already being debated back in ancient Greece.
Yeah, it's amazing how these themes keep recurring throughout history.
Plato's exploration of the relationship between rulers and laws, it really lays the groundwork for centuries of discussion about governance, legitimacy, and the rule of law, both within states and on the international stage.
It's like he set the stage for all the conversations that would follow.
Okay, now let's talk about laws.
Okay, hit me.
This is Plato's longest and some argue most mature work.
Interesting. So what's different here?
Here he presents a more pragmatic and, dare I say, even somewhat democratic vision of an ideal society.
Really? Plato embracing democracy. That's quite a departure from the philosopher-king model we talked about before.
It's not a complete embrace, but it's definitely a more nuanced perspective.
Okay, I'm listening.
So in laws, Plato proposes what he calls a mixed constitution as the ideal form of government.
A mixed constitution. What's that all about?
Well, this system combines elements of monarchy aristocracy and, yes, even democracy, balancing power and ensuring that no single group dominates.
So instead of having a philosopher-king ruling with absolute authority, you have a system where different groups have a voice and they can contribute to the decision-making process.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this mixed constitution is designed to prevent tyranny, promote stability, and ensure that the laws reflect the interests of the entire community.
So it's about finding that balance between the wisdom of the few and the collective will of the many.
You got it. And this concept of a mixed constitution, it's incredibly relevant for anyone studying international relations.
How so?
But think about the different forms of government we see around the world and the challenges of promoting democracy and good governance in so many diverse contexts.
Right, because there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. And Plato's laws, it provides this framework for understanding the strengths and weaknesses of different political systems and this ongoing debate about how to balance individual liberty with the need for order and stability.
It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Right. Now, I just have to say, this evolution in Plato's thinking, it's remarkable. He started with this idealistic vision of philosopher-kings ruling with absolute authority.
Right.
And then he grapples with the complexities of real-world governance, and he arrives at a more nuanced, and some might say even more practical approach.
It just shows that he wasn't afraid to challenge his own assumptions, to refine his ideas in light of new experiences and insights.
And that's a valuable lesson for anyone, especially those aspiring to a career in international relations.
Because the world is constantly changing.
Right, and the ability to adapt your thinking, to learn from new information, and to refine your approach, it's essential.
You got to stay flexible.
So what's the takeaway for our UPSC aspirant, especially those with international relations as their optional?
It's about understanding the evolution of political thought.
Okay.
Plato's ideas from the philosopher-king to the mixed constitution, they provide a framework for analyzing different forms of governance and their impact on both domestic and international affairs.
And remember, the UPSC isn't just about memorizing facts and theories. It's about demonstrating critical thinking, understanding different perspectives, and applying that knowledge to real-world situations.
And Plato's works offer a treasure trove of insights that can enrich your understanding of political systems, the nature of power, and the challenges of promoting justice and stability in a complex world.
So whether you're analyzing the motivations of a nation-state, dissecting a complex treaty, or grappling with the ethical dilemmas of international intervention,
Plato's ideas provide a valuable lens for understanding the enduring questions that drive international relations.
and don't forget, Plato wasn't just a theorist. He was actively engaged in the political events of his time. He traveled, he advised rulers, and he even attempted to implement some of his ideas in the real world. That practical element is something to keep in mind as you study his works and connect them to contemporary issues.
It's about bridging that gap between theory and practice.
Well said. So there you have it. We've journeyed through the world of Plato, from the idealistic heights of the Republic to the more pragmatic terrain of statesmen and laws. We've explored his ideas on justice, power, governance, and the human condition, and we've seen how those ideas continue to resonate in the world of international relations today.
And hopefully we've given you some food for thought for your UPSC journey.
Exactly. If you found this deep dive helpful for your UPSC prep, please hit that subscribe button and give us a like, and be sure to check out the show notes for further reading suggestions. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those intellectual gears turning.